Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is SharePoint Power Hour. This is our show that we do every Wednesday at 11 Central. So glad to have you all here this week. We've been doing sort of a series on forms lately. So we'll go ahead and introduce ourselves, and we'll talk about kind of the concepts that we're going to be demoing in this series about forms. And okay, I'll go ahead and kick it off. So I'm Laura Rogers, Microsoft MVP. We all work at Rackspace Hosting. This is my team at Rackspace. We have a SharePoint team. We do hosted SharePoint. So we've got we'll go Kevin, and then Ryan, and then Joelle, and then Stephen, and we'll all go. Just tell everybody a little bit about yourselves.
Well, I'm Kevin Hughes, a SharePoint architect here at Rackspace, based out of Kansas City, and my role is basically to find out what companies need, figure out the solution, and get them what they need to solve all their issues when it comes to SharePoint, and that is what I do.
Hi, I'm Ryan Keller. I am the branding guy on the SharePoint team here at Rackspace. So if you need your SharePoint to look a little less SharePointy, that's my thing. I'm based in Colorado, and I guess that's all I got for today. For now.
I'm Stephen Wilson. I'm on the SharePoint Business Solutions team as well. I do a lot of infrastructure stuff that we don't really touch on a lot here, but then I do some of the initial user uptake of SharePoint. You know, when you're first getting into SharePoint, how should you lay out your sites? What's the difference between a site collection and a web or sub-web? You know, how to make sure that you're not shooting yourself in the foot with the initial setup of SharePoint, which is a pretty common problem.
All right, so Joelle's going to be the one doing the demo, so I'll let her introduce herself last. But basically, the concept of SharePoint Power Hours, we do, these business solutions that aren't necessarily going to be any kind of code, no programming, no, actual server administration stuff, but all the stuff in between. And the way it works is we are broadcasting live on YouTube, but we use Google Hangouts to do this. So if you're watching on YouTube, you'll actually have a little yellow link that says "Be part of the conversation." You can click to go over to the Hangout, the Google Hangout, and that's where there's a Q&A. So when you go to the Google Hangout, it has a little Q&A button, and it'll bring up a little panel on the side. So that's where you can ask your questions. So that's kind of the whole purpose of us doing this live, is that we like you guys to be able to ask us questions as we go, and it's very interactive, and kind of keep it that way. So if you go over to the Google Hangout, it's going to, by default, on the right-hand pane, it's going to have something called Showcase. If you click the little grid of squares sort of towards the top right corner, it lets you flip between Showcase and Q&A. So then that's where it has a little button that says Ask a New Question. So it's, ever since they added the little Showcase app, it makes it a little confusing, a little harder to get to Q&A, but that's where it is. So we encourage you guys to ask questions. So having to do with this series, last week on Power Hour, I did a demo of, it was episode 64. I did InfoPath lists customized with InfoPath, and how to just kind of real simple, absolute beginner basics on how to get around in there and how to just customize a simple list form. This week, Joelle is going to do an InfoPath form library form, which is a little bit more of an advanced way of doing forms, and she's just kind of talk about a couple of reasons why you do it that way, and how to publish forms and things like that, and do a demo. And then next week, we're going to be off for Christmas, so the next 2 weeks we're going to be closed. We're not going to have Power Hours because we're going to be on vacation. So no Power Hour on next Wednesday, looks like the 24th, and then no Power Hour, I think it's the 1st or the 31st. So, and then 3 weeks, that's where we'll pick back up. So that's going to be in January, and I think let's go ahead and continue this form series. So I've actually gone and added in the SharePoint App Store, I went ahead and added apps for K2 and Nintex, like Forms products, And we're gonna actually demo those so that we can compare InfoPath to K2 to Nintex, and we'll see if we know of any other forms products, because people are always asking us about what to do about customizing your forms. So we'll just have a good little series of comparisons. So all right, let's go. I'm gonna turn it over to Joelle, and she'll introduce herself and do her demo. Thanks.
All right. Well, hello everybody. I am Joelle Farley. I'm sure if you've watched Power Hour before, you've probably seen me on here. I am a consultant with Rackspace, just like the rest of the team. So I actually work a lot with customers, similar to the type of stuff Laura does. I work a lot with things like workflows, also helping plan information architecture, forms, building business solutions with no code and all of those wonderful things. And I am based I'm just outside of Atlanta in Woodstock, Georgia. So we're all, as you can tell, the team is kind of spread out all over the country. So I am with Laura down in the South, yeah. So today, as Laura mentioned last week, she did go into talking about list forms, so which is the kind of the beginner and the first step into customizing different things in SharePoint with forms, with InfoPath. So I am going to look at the library forms, so form library forms, in InfoPath today, do some demo around that, and just kind of have a conversation around some of those differences between list forms and library forms. So let me go ahead. I'm going to get my screen share going here. So just bear with me one moment. And as you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and we'll be happy to take a look at those. So InfoPath form library forms. So creating InfoPath forms are created in InfoPath and then published to a SharePoint server. So typically when you're working with the form library form, it's not always the case, but typically you're going to go into InfoPath first and then create the form from inside of InfoPath, and then you will actually publish from InfoPath to create the library that the form will live in. So with list forms, it's a little bit different, because a lot of times you're going to go into actually go into SharePoint, go into your list that you've already created, and then you're going to customize the list with InfoPath. So it's kind of the reverse. We typically go into InfoPath first. Users are going to be able to complete forms using either the InfoPath client or the form services, which is what allows them to actually fill it out in the browser. So essentially, if you are publishing your forms into SharePoint, then your users will not need to have InfoPath on their computer. They can actually just go right to the browser, fill out the form, submit it, and then they're good to go. They don't actually have to open up the form inside of InfoPath. So that saves on some overhead for installing that additional Office product. But the person who is designing the form, so the person who's actually going to do the setup that we're going to kind of show today, that person will have to have InfoPath Designer. So at least one person will have to have that, but your users overall do not need to necessarily have that installed. So creating and filling out a form, so you guys will see in a few minutes, I am going to go in and go into InfoPath and use this SharePoint form library template. That is the template that we start with. As you can see, you can also create a SharePoint list directly from InfoPath, so you don't have to go through SharePoint first. But that you can, for the SharePoint form library, we do have to go in and create it this way. You will see some advanced form templates as well. So we rarely use these, just as since we're mostly dealing with out-of-the-box forms. We're really using these advanced form templates. Most of the time, they are reserved for special situations and developers and that kind of thing. So for the most part, we're dealing with the SharePoint list form and then also the SharePoint form library form as well. Okay, so form controls. We're going to get in there and take a look in just a second. So what you'll notice is, and Laura may have covered some of this stuff last week, I'm sure, but I just wanted to kind of start off from the beginning. So what you'll notice is that the controls are all the stuff that is going to get filled out in your form. So on the screenshot here, you can see that we have like a text box and a drop-down list box, checkbox, date picker, people person group picker, very similar to the column types that you have when you're creating columns in a SharePoint list or library. So your controls are very similar to that. Those are the things that are going to get filled out. You'll be able to use tables inside of your form to kind of organize these controls and make them look a little better, make it look like an actual form instead of just a bunch of fields. And then inputs are they're going to be the things that collect info from the person filling it out. So that's where they're actually going to be entering. The controls are where they're going to be entering the information. So they're going to choose an option from a drop-down. They're going to enter in into a text box. They're going to pick a date. Those are going to be the input fields that you'll have on your form. And then objects, we also have objects in InfoPath. So objects, really what they are they allow us to kind of get that form feel. So we have things like your button and picture button. Button and picture button, you can do different things. You can have those if you have multiple pages inside of your form. So if you have multiple different pages, then you have to, let's say you have one page is where they fill out the form, the other page is for the approvers, then you create a button that switches between those. You can create a button and build rules on that button so that if that button's clicked, it may update a field. And then probably the most common way of using buttons is for submitting. So you will add a button to your page and then build the rules around that when that button's clicked, the form gets submitted and maybe some information gets saved or some fields get changed as well. And we'll kind of see an example of that as I go through here today. And then finally, we also have containers. So containers, basically, they are repeating tables, allow multiple list items to be entered. So that's a repeating table is one type of container. Optional sections can be used to hide or show controls or text conditionally. So basically, you have repeating tables and you also have a section. So you can put a section in your form, and then you can put tables and a bunch of fields and stuff inside of that section, and then you can build rules so that, let's say that section is hidden. Let's say if the status of the form is equal to new, then you can have that entire section be hidden or disabled depending on the status somewhere else in the form. So there's a lot of different control and stuff that you have around the form with containers. So publishing the form, so publishing to SharePoint, when you are publishing a form library form, you will go through the publishing process, and basically it's going to allow you to select, you have a couple of different options. You can select form library, which is probably the most common, and it's the one that we use most often. You also have the option of publishing your form to a site content type. This is a good option, but it is something that I would say is a little bit more advanced, and it will take some consideration on how you are going to use that form and if it's even necessary to have it as a site content type, and how that will look inside your site. So you definitely want to have a pretty good understanding of what content types are and how they work before you publish a form to a content type. But that is an option. And then also the administrator approved form. It's only necessary when the form needs to be used in multiple site collections, and it's also considered advanced because it's going to require some help from someone that has that higher level access. So if you're just a site owner, and you just have full control on your site, but you don't have control over the entire farm, then you're probably going to need to pull some help from somebody that does. So those are just some of the different options. Today we're going to really focus in on that form library, so we will publish a form to a form library and kind of see how that looks. So I'm sure if you watched last week, you probably saw Laura kind of talk about how lists and form libraries differ. So list forms, they have some simplicity. They're pretty easy to use. You can get in you can have a list created already and then customize the form and make little changes and then quickly publish that back without a lot of issue. So form libraries, the reason that we use form libraries is just that they have some additional options that you don't have if you're just modifying a list form. So basically a form library, it's actually going to store the form as a document. So it's not just going to be like with a list, it's basically just the way that the form in the list looks. So the way that when you open up that information and it's displayed on the screen, it's really just the way that it looks on the screen. But with a form library form, you can actually, that form is a document. So there's a lot that can be done with that document. The document will obviously have associated metadata. So those are that could be the columns that you are promoting from InfoPath, or it could just be some additional things that you've added to that document after it's been published from InfoPath. So you have that. Some of their benefits, because it is a document library and it's an actual document, is you have check-in, check-out. You can use repeating tables with a form library form, so that's not something you can do with a list form. It can go offline. You can use parameters. So with the parameters, with an InfoPath form, you can actually promote different columns to be parameters, and then you can connect to other web parts. So you could create like a dashboard where you're sending values, or you're sending values either to or from an InfoPath form to another web part on the page, maybe like with a web part connection or something similar. They can be published globally, and then also you can customize your submit. So the one thing you can do is you can say, all right, when they hit submit, it's going to save this file with maybe a specific custom name. Maybe you're pulling in one of the fields into the name of the file, or you're doing some other kind of formatting with the name. So you can really customize the submit with a form library form. So some examples, and one of the examples we'll see today is actually an absence request. So some of the other examples here is travel requests, expense requests, and then, like I said, I'll show you guys an absence request a little bit later. A pretty complex form that you'll get to kind of get a good feel of those features. All right, so if we can customize a list with InfoPath, why would we need to create forms instead? So that's a really good question that a lot of people ask. So the things that you want to consider is basically, how will the content be displayed in your form? Will all the content need to be columns in the list? So basically, with a list form, when you create new columns, those things are all, or when you create new controls or fields in your form, those things will automatically become columns in your list. But with an InfoPath form library form, you could actually create, let's say if you had some fields in your form that needed to be hidden, maybe they were just for the purpose of kind of, creating rules or doing different logic inside of your form, and you don't want those to be published to the list itself, you have that option. So you do not have to promote those to be columns in your library. So that's something to consider. So do you need to use input parameters? So do you want the ability to be able to send parameters between the InfoPath form and another web part on a page? That's something to consider. You're going to need to create some kind of a dashboard or something like that. Then it might be better to go with a form library form. And also, where will you be sending the data? So when you publish the form, where are you going to be sending that information? Are you going to need to send it somewhere besides the library? Are you going to have to have any kind of custom submit options? So that would be something to consider as well, because then once again, a form library would probably be your best option. And then also, just in general, if we're dealing with a very complex form where there's a lot of views, a lot of rules inside of the form, then we would probably go with a form library form, because it's just going to be easier to manage, and it's just going to make more sense with the way that those are stored in SharePoint. And also, something else to consider is, let's say if one time, sometimes we get the requirement to take a form library form and then, let's say, save it as a PDF, like using some custom development. Maybe we need to save that form as a PDF, and that PDF needs to be stored in another library or sent somewhere. It would be much easier to do that with a form library form than it would be with a list form. So that's just that's another thing to consider, is just kind of overall, what is the process, how is it going to be used, and then kind of deciding between then, is it simple enough for a list form, or is it complex enough for a form library form? All right. So we'll come back to that a little bit later. Let's go ahead and take a look at actually building a form library form. So I have one form here that's completely built out. It's an absence request. I'm going to come to that a little bit later, but I do want to start off with just kind of going into InfoPath and showing you how you can kind of get started with a very simple form library form, just to kind of show you the process. So we're going to go into InfoPath. Bear with me one second while I pull it up. So I have InfoPath open here, and as you can see from that screenshot in my slide, I can see I have a SharePoint list option and a SharePoint form library option here. So I'm going to go with SharePoint form library, and it will even tell me here, start with a built-in layout, add controls, create rules, and apply formatting. Users fill out the form in SharePoint and save it to a form library. So it gives me a little bit of detail there, and then I can go ahead and I can click Design this form. So I get this lovely layout here. That's kind of the out of the box. It's what they give you when you first start with a form library form. And of course, I can change this a little bit. So I can go up to my design, page design up here. And I can change the layout. I can change the color. I can add a different template here. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and actually I'm going to remove this one. So I'm going to add a new template, and I just went to page layout and template, and you can see the different options we have there. And then I can go ahead and I can change the color, make it look a little bit, I don't know about that one. Laura, do you have a favorite color?
No, there's an LSU one that looks like purple and gold. So.
Oh, okay, okay. Is it that one?
It's obnoxious though.
Yeah, I didn't know if I was thinking about that. I was like, do I have a favorite? I think I usually go
they
industrial.
That's kind of professional looking, like green.
Yeah, I stayed in professional and industrial. I typically stick with those guys. Let's go with this one. No, that doesn't look good. Yeah, then this is what happens when you're somebody who likes to look at like design and colors. You end up spending way too much time on simple things like that. So there's a trick. All right, so once we have that cut it down, we can go ahead and we can add in tables to store our different fields here. And so you'll have a bunch of different options. You have 2 columns, single column, 4 columns, and you'll see even here it'll show you the ones that have like shading on them. Those typically just give some depth to your form, so I like to go with a lot of those depending on what kind of form I'm building. So here I'm going to click on this one. And so now I have a table, and then I can go here and I can add another table if I want to. So you can really add several different tables and build out your form. And as I mentioned, you can also put controls for sections in your form. So I'm going to go back to the Home tab of InfoPath. And then here under controls, I can expand this, and I can see input. Those are the different fields that I can add, or different types of fields. I can see objects, like I mentioned. Those are things like your buttons and hyperlinks and pictures. And then containers, this is where I can see section, repeating table, choice group, and choice section. So let's say if I knew that I needed to have some fields in a section that was hidden, depending on the value of another field, then I could go ahead and add that in. So if I add a section in here, so it just adds that blank section, and then I can insert a table directly into this. And then any fields I add to that table, I will apply to any of the rules that I put on the section will apply to that. So I can just add one here just so we can kind of see how that looks. So now once I kind of have an idea of what my form, the layout of my form, I can go ahead and start adding fields to it. Typically with a form library form, we can, I just saw Andy's comment, it says, some of the out-of-the-box InfoPath themes look like a hot dog cart exploded. That's great. I love that. That's awesome, Andy. Thanks for the comment. All right. So what we typically do, just for organizing, is we have an idea of the different fields that we're going to create in our form, and we will, because with a form library form, you typically have a lot more fields that you're adding. So we typically will create some organization over here in our fields list. And so what you can do is you can actually right-click on my fields, and I can add a group here. And I could call this one, we're going to say this is a new site request. So we're going to call this site information will be the first group. We have a group here called site information, and then this is my section down here, and so we'll call this one, we're just going to call it oops. To give it a name, and then I'm going to add another group here. And I'm going to call this group client information. I have these different groups over here. And what I can do is I can add my fields, and then I can better organize everything by adding the fields to these groups. And so then that way, when I am building out this form, let's say if this form ends up being multiple views and having a lot of rules and stuff, it could actually have up to like 100 or 200 fields by the time I'm done, depending on how complex it is. And so you can imagine if I'm just adding them right to the page and I'm not really paying attention to this list over here, it could get a little insane to look at.
I saw one the other day that had like up to 400 something, and they were all just field 1, field 2, blah 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 blah. Yeah.
Oh yeah. They can get insane. And then if you ever, you may be able to manage that or whatever. But let's say if you don't touch that form for a year, or you have somebody else come in and comes in and tries to make a change to the form or update an issue or fix an issue, you can imagine that would be really hard to look at.
Yeah, so, when you want to go and fix it later, and you want to go actually give them real names, if people have already been filling it out, then you actually lose your data. So you can't fix it later. You have to, you want to do it right then.
Exactly. It's just like anything else. Just having some pre-planning and organization before you get started is going to help you out in the long run. So we typically will build these groups here, and then we can add fields directly to these groups, and then keep everything organized. So I'm going to go ahead and, like I said, I'm going to add a new site request, and I'm doing this off the top of my head, so bear with me. All right. So we're going to say the site title. We'll do client information up here. So we'll call this client information. And then I'm going to move this because I should have done another one. I'm going to insert that same kind of table. And then this will be site information. And as you can see, as I go through, I can kind of, adjust the look and feel of it. So I have client information and site information. So I'm going to go ahead and I am going to go to my client information. I'm going to add a field. I'm going to call this client name. Okay. And then I want to add this to here. So I'm just going to click here. And I'm going to add a text box called client name. And then I can add that in. And as you can see, so I've added that text box. It's just a text box, and it's now nicely underneath my my group here. So now let's say, so I have client name. We'll say client ID. So I'm going to add another one, client ID, and then add that to my list, client ID. And we'll say client name, client ID, we'll do region. So this one will be a little bit different, so we'll add a drop-down box here. And as you can see, if I right-click, when I want to add this, I right-click on it here, and then I have these different options. So I see drop-down list. I don't just have to do text box. I see drop-down list, combo box, etc. Even if I click more here, I even have more options. So I can decide what that field will show up as. So I'm going to do drop-down list. Region, and we'll say the last one we'll just do state. And I'll delete this last one here. Delete this row. So now I have client name, client ID, region, and state. So those are all done. They're all nicely organized under my client information here. So I'm done with that section. So then here I go to site information. So now I'm going to go ahead and just add a few fields since they're requesting a site. So we'll call this external request. So here they're going to add, so we'll just add a couple fields really quick just to kind of give you guys an idea. So we have site name. Oops, I didn't click in the right place. And you guys will notice that when I'm adding the fields, there's a specific reason why the format that I use, like if it's 2 words, I do this. So I do site with no space and then a capital N name. The reason that is because when I go to publish, it will automatically set this up correctly. So what it will do is when you'll see when I go into publish and promote these fields, it will pull site name and it will pull it correctly. So it will say site space name, and that way it'll look correctly as a column name when I go to publish it. So you'll see that in a little bit. But that's just something to keep in mind when you're naming your fields. Because in InfoPath, there's no spaces allowed, but you do want to use that capital for the second word because of the way it pulls it in. So we'll say site name. We'll add in site URL. So we'll add that in. And then we'll say site name, site URL, server. Did that one backwards, but server.
Oh, we have a question in the chat room. Howard says you mentioned you'll compare it to K2 and Intake, so I'd also like to see Clasis. I heard it was a great tool to replace InfoPath. Is that an app in the App Store, Howard? I never heard of that. I looked through the App Store for things that were forums when I was talking about comparing them, but yeah, I'm not going to compare anything that I actually would have to install on a server or anything. I'm going to just look at stuff that people would be able to put in there and use it as an app. But yeah, there are probably lots of different ones that are server installation type of products. You're right.
Yeah, and I can pull some of the, even if we're not showing them, because like we have K2 and Intex we can show, but like Formotus is another big one, and I can pull like their list of what they do differently. You know what I mean? Like we can at least discuss that and take a look at that. I know like Formotus is a lot better with mobile than K2 and Intex are, so that might be something to look at as well. And then Formotus, I don't know if you guys have heard that, but that's the one that's developed by the guy who created InfoPath. So he left Microsoft and started Formotus. Yeah. All right, so we're going to say site owner. Oops. Site owner, and then I think I'll just do one more field and then we'll move on. Oh yeah, so I noticed, I forgot that I can't add. So some of the fields you can't add that way. So what I typically do for that, I'm going to delete this, is you can insert it and then put it into the group. So I'm going to go ahead and insert a person in group. And then I can move it under site information. And so now it's under there, and I'll rename it. All right. And we'll delete this last one here. And I'm sure there's many more fields we would need for a site request, but since we're just doing a quick demo for this piece. All right, so as you can see here, I have my fields nicely organized, so that's a big part of it there. And now if I want to go ahead and get this published into SharePoint, into a library, one thing I did forget to add, I wanted to do this. Hold on, one more. I wanted to do a request date because I'm going to show you guys how I can pull that into the title of my form. Request date. And we're going to add that here as a date field.
So Joelle, what do you find to be the most sort of thing that trips people up in a form library specifically, like the thing that's the hardest or most confusing about dealing with a form library as opposed to just, you know, customizing a list?
I'd probably say like the publishing is going to be a little bit more complicated because they have to decide what columns they're promoting and how that will look and that kind of thing. And also, one of the big things is that you can use, so like the repeating table, it's kind of one of those like it's a gift and a curse, you know? So you can add a repeating table and then like your form, the user experience of your form is nice. It's awesome, right? Because it looks really good. It's nice to have. But then trying to get that information from the repeating table into your library in a way that you can then report on is really, really difficult, and it's not going to look the way that people expect it to. So I'd say that's another thing that I often see people run into. They get a little like frustrated because they can use the repeating table and it looks nice and it works really great in the form, but then trying to get that data later can be a little complex and a little weird.
Yeah, I think that to me the whole submitting and publishing part and figuring out the file name and all that tends to be the absolute most confusing thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say that and the repeating table are the two that I would say are definitely
And you guys, if they're watching live, feel free to, shout it out in the chat window, because we know we have like 25 more minutes left, and Joelle can kind of try and maybe make sure she addresses some of those and kind of shows you. Yeah, I'm volunteering you for that.
Oh no, it's all good. I'm just kind of going through a light demo here, so definitely, if any questions, I'll be happy to answer. And I'll show you guys. I'm going to move over in a few minutes and show you the very extremely complex and what I think is awesome absence request that I've worked with Laura to build. We actually have, what do they call that, like productized several forms that do different things. So I'm going to show you guys one of those because it's pretty neat. It's a form library form. All right, so I'm going to publish this. Since we're talking about publishing, let's go ahead and just publish that. Now, obviously, I have a section down here I haven't used yet, but we can always come back and add that in later. So let's go ahead. We're going to publish this form to a form library. So I'm going to go to File and then Publish. Do this first, and then I'm going to come back and work with my Submit option. So I'm going to go to Publish, and then I'm going to publish to a SharePoint server. So I choose that, and I'm going to have to save the form first. So we'll just save it as, we'll just call this Power Hour Site Request. And then I need to grab, I had some demo issues earlier, so I had to switch sites. So I'm going to go ahead and grab this URL over here. I basically just I'm punching in the URL of the site that I am publishing this form to. So wherever I want that library to live, that's the URL I'm putting here for that site. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next, and let's hope it lets me connect. And it did. And sometimes what it will do here, just so you know, I had already done this just to make sure it would work, but what it will usually do here is it's going to prompt you for credentials for that site. So you may have to enter, just be prepared to enter those when you go to publish. So then here is where I'm seeing where I can choose between a form library form, a site content type, or administrator approved form. I am going to use the form library option for this demo. Up here I can enable this form to be filled out by using a browser, so if I did not want them to be able to, if for whatever reason you want them to use InfoPath, you can uncheck that and kind of force them to use InfoPath. But by default that's going to be checked for you. So I'm going to go ahead and click Next. And then here's where I can decide when I'm first publishing, I'm probably going to be creating a new form library, so I would leave that checked. But let's say if I've worked on my form for a while and I just need to go in and promote a new field that I've added to my form, then I could go in and do the update, and then it would choose the library that it's already been published to. So for this one, I'm going to do a create a new form library because I'm starting from scratch. So go ahead and click Next. I give my form library a name, so we're going to call it External Site Request. And I always leave the spaces out here because when it creates the URL, I like it to be a clean URL, but you can always go back into that site, that library later, and then change the title so that it has spaces in it. And you can add a description if you want to. So go ahead and click Next. And then here is where you decide, of all of the fields that you've created, which ones are going to become columns in your library. And so this is where the form library is a little bit different than a list form, because if I had hidden fields in my form that I was using just to kind of run some rules or build some different things inside of the form, then I don't have to promote those, so they don't have to be in my library taking up space. I can just not include them. But for anything I do want to include as columns in my library, then I can go ahead and add here. So I can go Add, and we'll go to Client Information, Client Name, and you'll notice now that my column names, they're going to be set up correctly since I use that client name, that kind of the way that the configuration I used here. Now it's set up here. And then I can even check whether users can edit the information in these columns with the data sheet or the quick edit. I can set that up. I can check that here as well.
Yeah, like if you need to have a workflow that actually writes to any of those fields when it does anything automatically, then you would need to allow it to do it there. And then if you have site columns that already exist, it'll let you pull them in.
Yep. If you have site columns, you can choose from here and find them, definitely. So go ahead and add that. And so we'll just add a couple of these. As you can see, I'm just going through the list. Request state. And then I'll go to my other group, and I'll just add these few here as well. And then that'll be good. Server. All right, so there's all my column names. Now here is parameters. So as we mentioned, we can actually take fields from our SharePoint or our InfoPath form, and we can promote them as parameters so that we could then use them in web part connections with other web parts and stuff like that. So what you would do here is you would add these as parameters, and it's pretty much the same thing. So you choose what fields are going to be your parameters from your field list. And then you can decide whether it's an input parameter, an output parameter, or if you want it to be both. And of course, that means whether or not it's receiving information from another web part or whether it's sending that information, you can do that. And one thing I've used this for, just as a quick example, is I've used this because if you've ever used Excel services and you have created something like, let's say you had some kind of like a calculator of some sort, like a loan calculator or a cost calculator of some sort, and you had parameters in the actual Excel spreadsheet that you promoted with Excel services, you'll notice that the parameter view with Excel services is really ugly, and you can't change it. Like it'll put all the parameters in alphabetical order, and you have no control over that display. So what I've done before is I've created something in InfoPath, an InfoPath form that has those fields, those same fields, and then I just use the InfoPath form to pass the parameter from InfoPath to the Excel spreadsheet. And then it just gives you a better user experience. It looks a little bit easy. It's a little bit easier for users to work with because you can really customize the display there.
That's a great idea. So what kind of information were they like just sending like filter information straight to a spreadsheet that was in an Excel Web Access web part or something?
Yep, exactly. So it's a spreadsheet where like they don't want anybody to open the spreadsheet because there's some calculations and formulas in there, but they want users to be able to come in and like a loan calculator is a good example. So like I want to see if I have a mortgage and it's this much money and it's this many years, what is my payment going to be? Like that kind of thing, so they can come in, they punch in the values, it sends that value to the Excel services web part, and then they can see it. And then as soon as they go away from the page, it doesn't save anything. So as soon as they go away from the page, it just refreshes back to the way it was, the default or whatever. And that, like I said, so the parameter view in Excel services is just hideous, and so that's why I've used InfoPath to kind of just make that look a little nicer for users. All right, so that's where you promote parameters. So then we're going to go ahead and we're going to click Next here, and then I can go ahead and I'm going to publish this. And we'll give it a second. Hopefully it doesn't explode on me for my demo. Demo gods, be with me. And we'll give it a second. And you'll notice that it usually goes through its whole spiel. All right, so it has published that form to the library. But now I need to set up the submit rules so that when somebody actually opens a form and saves it, it saves the correct way to the library. Because right now it would look a little funky if I tried to go in and submit it. I actually probably wouldn't be able to submit it because I haven't even put a button or anything on my form. So I can go ahead, I can close this. I can actually go over to the site that I was on and refresh so we can actually just see that the library is there. So now we see external site request. And if I click new here, I can see the form, but as you can see, it just basically has the save as, there's no submit button. So we want to kind of have more control over that. So I'm going to go back.
I hate save and save as.
Yeah, save and save as are a pain.
I was just migrating an old just like an old form that was being migrated to a new 2013 site, so I got to see just some library that somebody had created years ago, and they had like thousands and thousands of items in it, but they hadn't created the form with any submit at all. There were no data connections. People were just using save and save as. There's no data validation, by the way, when you let them do that. Like any required fields, it doesn't matter. They can just fill out or not fill out whatever they want, and then they can just name the file whatever they want, or create. It had tons of just folders everywhere and just random names everywhere, and there was no rhyme or reason. It can be a real mess when you don't get me started. But it can be a real mess when you do that, right, Tanya? Don't know if Tanya's. But yeah, we came across that recently.
Yeah, because I mean, they can, when they name it anything they want to, you can override a bunch of other forms, and it's a hot mess. All right, so we're going to add in the submit really quick. So I went to, the way I do this is I go to my data tab in InfoPath, and I go to data connections. You can actually go, there's a couple different ways to do this, to submit. You can do submit form, but I usually go this way. So data connections, add, and then I'm going to submit data, create a connection to submit data. Next, and I'm going to submit to a library. Next. And then here I just get the URL for my library. So I'm going to go back over here and copy that. And there's a trick here we're going to have to tell you about because of 2013. So you'll notice that 2013 is awesome, and they put a bunch of junk in the URL now. So we have to, in InfoPath, of course, because InfoPath isn't really, hasn't really been upgraded for 2013, for SharePoint 2013, you will have to remove that junk from the URL for it to work correctly. And the junk I'm talking about is just this right here. So it's basically everything after your /site and then the beginning of your document library. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to remove that. I have an extra.
Oh, I see a question. Frank says, in InfoPath 2007 Publishing Wizard, I don't see the parameter option. How would I add the field as a parameter in 2007? You would not. That didn't come out till 2010.
Yep. Thanks. So yeah, so then there's the URL for my my library there. So then the file name, so right now when the file gets saved, it's literally called form. So you'll notice that very easily you could be overriding all these different forms that people are submitting. So what you want to do here is you want to give it a unique name, so that way when somebody submits it, if they did come in and submit, like somebody came in and submitted a new form, it would have a unique name from a form that was submitted earlier. So there's, you have many ways of doing this. You can use a combination of fields that are being filled out in the form. Like, for example, the one I'll use is I'm going to do client name with request date. You can also use, there's different functions inside of the form of the formula here where you could add like the now, so it will put like the exact time and date stamp that it was submitted, so it'll put that in the form name. So there's a couple of different things you could do there to kind of get your unique form name. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm actually just going to, as I mentioned, I am going to concatenate the client name and the request date from the form as my form name. So I'm going to insert the function concat.
Oh, just a quick tip on that. Make sure that if you're going to concatenate multiple fields together like that make sure they're required fields.
Yeah, exactly.
If they fill it out, then they try to submit the form and you get an error, you get a funky file name.
Yep, exactly. Thank you for mentioning that. Then I just added, what I did here is I just added a dash between them, and then I'm going to add request date, and then I will delete this part. Just keep it pretty simple right there. So now I'm publishing to that library. When they hit submit, it will submit with this name. And then I can decide whether I want to allow overwrite if the file exists. So if they submit with the exact same information, do I want to let it overwrite? I can decide that here. We'll just say yes for this situation, or for this example. I'm going to do next. And then I can give it a name. I just leave it at the default, and I can set it as the default submit connection, and then finish. So then I have my submit connection, so now I can kind of finish out my form. So I can add a submit button down here, and I'm going to go to home and objects button, and you can add a pretty picture button. I think Laura's demo, she added one last week. Those are my favorite thing, but I don't have any. I don't have any pictures on hand right now, but those are really cool. And I'll show you one in the actual form I'm going to show you before the end of the session here. So I'm going to right-click this, change the button properties. I'm going to call this submit. Click OK. And then I want to build the rule on this that knows how to use that submit. So I'm going to go to properties, manage rules, action, submit. And then I just add the submit data. And then it just has that data connection. That's the library submit I just created. As that by default because it's the only one. And then I can say I want to close the form once that's done. And as you can see here, I also have all these. I can switch views. I can set a field's value. So one of the things you'll notice in that kind of completed form that we have is that as you hit submit, there is actually a status field that gets changed and some other fields that get updated. So you can really build out a lot of logic and stuff just through your submit buttons. So now that that's done, the other thing I want to do is I want to get rid of the save and save as, because Forget those guys. We don't like those. So I'm going to go to File and Form Options. And then here I can actually decide what shows in the toolbar in SharePoint. So I can either just say I don't want anything to show, but I actually sometimes will like the close to show. So I can uncheck. I'm going to uncheck Submit, Save, Save As. I uncheck Submit because I have my Submit button. I want them to use that. Just in case I built any rules and stuff on that, I want them to always use that. But I'm going to leave close so they can get it. They can use that.
That's a great point, Joelle, about the rules, especially if you have like different buttons on your form, like different buttons in different places and different views and things in your form, and you want them to use those, and they all have like different things that are happening in the rules behind the scenes. Yeah, definitely disable the generic submit, because then when they touch it, it'll do something that maybe you don't want them to do.
Yeah, exactly. Like one of your rules may not run or something. Yeah, it's very, very careful about that. So I uncheck those, and then I uncheck views, because usually if I have views, I am guiding them through the views. I don't want them to get to the views themselves. So I usually uncheck that, and then I leave close and print previews, and that way they can use those if they want them. Click OK, and then I'm just going to do a quick publish because I've already published now. So I'm just going to use my quick publish button up here, which you guys probably saw during the list form demo. So I'm going to click on that, and then just let this publish to the site. And we'll give it a second. So is everybody ready for the holidays?
Sorta.
No.
No. Yeah, I have to do more shopping for sure. Alright, I'm going to click OK. And go over here, refresh. So now I can go ahead, I'm going to try to load this. And we're going to go ahead, and you'll see now that I only have close, and I have the regular clipboard stuff, and then I also have print preview. So here I'm just going to do test. Because I'm super creative, I didn't do anything in region, so we're just going to leave that blank. We'll say Georgia. Request date is today. Now, of course, I could do this a little bit better, make this a URL field, you know, do all that stuff, have actual drop downs, and then we'll just leave that as is. And so now when I hit submit, though, so now it submits that form, and it's going to show the test dash the request date. And I could also mess with that date if I just wanted it to be the date without the time. I could kind of adjust that in InfoPath. But as you see now, I've submitted that form, and it's named correctly. And my users only have that one way of submitting, so they can't come up here and submit and save and mess everything up. They only have that one submit button, which allows me to kind of control how the form works. All right. So that's just a basic demo. So for the last couple of minutes here, we have a few minutes. Feel free to put questions in, but while we have these last few minutes, I want to show you a wonderful form that has a lot of stuff going on behind the scenes. So we have this absence request over here, and if I load this form, and I can see here that this form allows me to put in an employee name. It has a request date, so it actually already has that date locked in here. So today's date locked in, and that's all just in the rules and the form and the format of InfoPath, of the logic. And so then we have department. They can choose what department they're a part of, the phone number. And then down here we even have dates and hours. So this is the absence information. This is where they can choose the dates and stuff that they're off. So they can come here, they can choose paid time off, sick leave, etc., and then put in the hours. And then they can insert additional rows. So if they're off for a whole week, they can insert that here. And you'll notice that please remove duplicate dates, so they can't put duplicate dates in here. So we have some validation going on there. So like if I put in, let's say 12/24/2014, and then I do 12/25/2014, then that arrow will go away. I'm going to do paid time off. Paid time off. Actually, the error is still showing. That may be something else going on there. But we have notes, so we can put in notes. You can continue to add other dates. And then down here, you can have your context while you're away, and then you have the submit button here. So let's go in and take a look at this behind the scenes. Let me go back. It's not wanting to wake up. May have to do this. I'm just going to go into where I have this saved on my computer and then right click and hit design so it'll open up.
Oh, we've got a question. Christian says, I'm trying to create a weekly status form with parent-child, high-level info, and milestones. Struggling with pushing the data to 2 different lists. Oh, that's the age-old question, isn't it? SharePoint 2010. Any wisdom ideas you can provide? Oh, God. Okay, so I wrote a blog post about that. Of course, you've got repeating tables in InfoPath, but then once you do that, then you can't do anything with the data that's inside there. So let me just... I created a blog post that shows you how you could go just create 2 different lists in SharePoint, like 2 different libraries, and then be able to go use those as like a dashboard interface that lets you show the right data from each one, like on a web page instead of having feeding tables in a form. So I'll send you that link, and I'll shut up now.
Yeah, that's a good one. I know which one you're talking about. That's a good solution. Yeah, so I just really wanted to kind of quickly show a completed form for everyone. So as you can see, we also have our fields organized nicely over here. We do have those hidden fields so that we didn't want to, oops, clicked the wrong one. We have the hidden fields that we didn't want to promote and that kind of stuff. And if I open up the rules, go ahead and show the rules. Then I can see if I click my submit button, you guys will see that there's also all kinds of stuff happening with the submit button. So besides just submitting to the library and closing the form, we also have it setting values. So we have it setting a current status and a next approver value. We have a resubmit option, so then that way it looks at a status and it knows if it's being the form is being resubmitted. It knows to clear out some stuff that's going on elsewhere in the form. And you'll notice that this form, if I go to my page design, you'll see that this form actually has a couple different views. So basically the way this works is a user comes in and they go to they get the new form and they fill it out, and then it will look at who their manager is and it will send their manager an email with this form attached. So the manager, when they open the form, they get this approval view, and so it has all of the fields that the user filled out, but they're all read-only. And then the manager can come down and they will actually see this right here. So they'll see approval 1, they'll fill out their comments, they can click approve or reject, and those are those nice picture buttons that we talked about. And as they hit approve, so approver 1 will hit approve, and then basically what happens, there's 3 levels in this specific form. So if they hit approve, then approver 2 gets an email. This will all be read-only for approver 1, but they'll be able to hit approve down here. When they hit approve, then approver 3 gets it, they hit approve, and then after that, it will switch to the read-only view, and it will send an email. And then when the form is opened, you'll see a read-only view with the information that was entered and then all of the approvals read-only. So then you can kind of build, what we've done with these is we've used these to build a approval process with a form instead of having to rely on a workflow. And we've done this quite a bit, and I think we've actually, Laura, we may have done demos on this even in Power Hour before. But basically,
yeah, we might have. And that thing that I just mentioned, we did a Power Hour on it, and I put a link in there. But
all right, cool. But yeah, so you can build these approval processes inside of InfoPath, and then with the workflow, all you're really doing is looking at a status and then sending an email. So if it's this status, then send an email. If it's this status, then send an email. And you're not really depending on the workflow to do a lot of that. You're actually just letting the form and the logic in the form kind of move you through the approval process. This has been pretty successful for a lot of people. So let's see, especially those where you have, 4 or 5 levels of approval. It can get pretty complicated, but this makes it a little bit easier. And we even have down here, so let's say if it was rejected at any point, then the user has this originator modify and resubmit button. What this button does behind the scenes is it is going to switch them to the new view, and when it will know that they're resubmitting because it will have like a status that tells them, and then that's when they hit resubmit, it clears out all the approvals and comments so that it can basically just start over like it's a new process. So that's kind of a neat feature as well. So they don't actually have to delete this and start with a brand new form. They can just work in the same form that they already have. So all these fields here can stay filled out, and whatever they have to change, they can change, and then they can resubmit. And so you'll see that if we go over to Home or File and Publish, and we may not be able to see this. I can't remember if it will show me or not. Yeah, I'm locked out of there, so Never mind. I was just going to show you what fields were promoted, but I think we're running out of time anyway.
Yep, we got 1 minute, so yeah, I think that helped. I mean, people, you can tell, like, compared with the video that I did last week with just customizing a list form compared to, and how easy that is compared to what some of the extra hoops you have to go through with a form library form. Hopefully people will be able to kind of tell the difference. And, you know, but with a form library, you get all kinds of neat stuff and abilities that you don't get with the one on the list. So
yeah.
Yeah,
so like the approval process we were talking about would be something that you would absolutely need a form library form for.
Like anything that you need to switch between views, right? Like and multiple, you know, form load rules in different views and different, like, it's just very, very hard and clunky with a list form and doing all that stuff.
Exactly.
But if you don't know what views are, and that, I mean, then that's why a list form would be easy for you, because you don't have to worry about any of those more advanced concepts. It's just a simple form.
Yep.
So, all right. Cool. Thanks. Thanks, everybody, and let us know, I guess. You guys can make comments on the video in YouTube or in Google Hangouts if you have any forms products that... hold on. Michael says, any suggestions on how to open a different InfoPath form with information from the current form being filled out? Let's see. Michael, you could put a hyperlink. Open a different InfoPath form with information from the current form. I don't know what he means by it. I mean, when I think of opening a different form, I think about like a hyperlink that opens.
Or is he talking about like having two like InfoPath form web parts on a page and then like sending values?
Oh, maybe.
Maybe.
So like you can put an InfoPath form web part on a page
and use parameters.
And a web part connection. Not sure.
Yeah.
Frank real quick says, being new to this stuff, I really appreciate you guys. By far the best info on the web. Aw, thanks so much. Happy holidays, Frank. Thanks, Joelle. That was a good demo, and thanks everybody for coming. We'll see y'all in like 3 weeks.
Yeah. Have a
Bye,
good one.
everybody.
Bye.